And thank you very much. You shared with us a number of very interesting ideas, a proposal, issues, and so forth. I actually have some questions of my own that I would like to follow up on, but let me first give a chance to people in the room, and if there's anybody online also, and then we come back. Questions, comments, suggestions, reactions, maybe even your own thoughts on where you'd like to see this go forward. Washington audiences are never shy, so don't be shy. We have a mic coming around if you tell us your name and institution. And if you're going to be shy, then I will jump in. Emmy, thank you.
I'm just saving Rajul. I'm just saving Rajul from asking the first question. Thank you, Anne, for the presentation and kind of the thinking that you're doing in this area. You mentioned governance in one of your graphics, but then in fact you didn't return to it other than saying that mayors are accountable. And it seems to me that one of the issues is that mayors are, as you mentioned with your London example, often kind of unaware of how really food systems issues penetrate virtually every aspect of urban life. One of the initiatives that I've been looking at here in the US as a way to really focus on the governance of food systems in urban and peri-urban areas is the whole concept of food policy councils. And I discovered, somewhat to my surprise, that in fact there's more than 20 years experience with a lot of good lessons learned. And part of them have to do with sort of the physical infrastructure, and part of them have to do with the economic infrastructure, as you mentioned. But in fact, in the US, I think there's a growing interest in linking to the agriculture and production infrastructure as well. Not only farmers markets, but school procurement for school feeding and that sort of thing. So I guess I'm just asking my question. Your proposal didn't seem to really focus in on the governance segment very much. But this institutional innovation, which I think could be possible in rapidly growing cities like Accra or like Addis, for example, might be kind of another dimension of kind of bringing the practical operational aspects of food systems into play. So just a comment.
I should have used my extra minute to talk about governance, because it's actually a very key piece of what we're trying to do, is actually to look at what are the policy instruments that mayors have at their disposal to shape, as you said, the physical space, but also the institutional space, the school feeding programs, institutional feeding, farmers markets, those sorts of things. I think it's interesting, and I'd love to talk to you afterwards to know about these initiatives in the United States, because even though we're a development organization primarily, but looking at what lessons have been learned in some other countries, and in fact, you know, we're not adverse to actually working with a couple of cities in the United States if there was interest. I take your point that mayors don't always understand or know, and perhaps we're biasing the results of our research a bit by picking cities where the mayors are already committed to this. But I think it's important to work with people who want to move forward, and then you start demonstrating to others what can be done, what the importance is, what the results are.
Thank you very much. We have a hand at the back, and there's a mic coming. Tell us your name and institution also.
Jeanette Trammell with the Organization of American States. Thank you so much for your presentation, very interesting. I was glad to hear towards the end that you spoke about the private sector, and I'm very interested to hear more about that and ways of engaging the private sector in these important issues. So if you could perhaps elaborate on that, and if you have any examples of private-public partnerships, that would be great. Thank you.
So we're mainly working, well, we do a lot of work with the private sector in terms of the neglected and underutilized species, orphan crops work, because, you know, our feeling is that, you know, producers are already growing some of these crops, but they're for local use. So if you don't convince some aspect of the private sector to take those up in their supply chains, you're never going to move those crops out of an orphan status into markets and creating that demand pull from the market. So we do work quite a bit. On this agricultural biodiversity index, we are taking another tack of looking at some of the really large food companies and agribusiness companies to see what they're doing. And it's very interesting. One of the corporate partners we have sent me an email 2 days ago saying, okay, 2017, you got your money, let's start. You know, I mean, they're really, really excited about this. We're also about to sign a memorandum of understanding with a large food company to analyze one of their supply chains to see how they can better incorporate agricultural biodiversity either in that supply chain or to encourage the use of biodiversity alongside their products. So, you know, it's a private sector is really, really interesting. When I talked to the equipment manufacturer, they said, wow, we're really struggling with this. We see diversification, we see different models of ag production systems that are in our potential markets. And we need to be thinking how we as a company are going to help solve those people's challenges. So it's a very different kind of attitude on the part of some companies, which I think will start to spread. So.
Thank you very much. I think I'd seen Peter, your hand up.
I saw Peter's hand,
Yeah.
yes.
Peter Hazel, good to see you, Anne. This is an interesting proposal, and there are lots of questions, but one that hits me immediately, you're looking at sustainable production systems within cities and their immediate hinterlands. Are you now envisaging these city units becoming self-sufficient in food? I don't believe that. You were a trade economist. What is the role of the rest of the agricultural sector in this system? And what does it mean to talk about sustainable systems within just the hinterland and not the rest of the agricultural sector?
I haven't abandoned my trade views after all this time. No, of course not. I mean, cities are not going to supply all of their food from the peri-urban area. I mean, they will still rely on urban production for grains, meats, etc., and to some extent on imports. And I think that's part of the challenge is, you know, can people start sourcing some foods locally that they may be importing, not as a displacement, but as a different model. We're thinking about this in the sense that there are some crops that can be grown in the peri-urban area, that it makes sense to grow in the peri-urban area, that may be fresh produce that needs shorter supply chains. It may be crops that for some reason can't be produced or aren't being produced because of public policy incentives in other parts of the rural community. So it's not at all a self-sufficiency. It's, you know, how can you use the peri-urban areas to help improve the health of the people in the urban areas and also not have a negative impact on the environment around the cities. So.
Thank you. I had Schengen, you had your hand up, then there's a gentleman there, and then I'll come to you guys. For a mic for Schengen.
Hi. So, Anne, how are you going to convince our CGIAR colleagues about this proposal, about the risk? Well, you have my support, by the way. So what about
all I need.
Rice, wheat, maize, or other research centers who can really take this on to really tackle some of the emerging issues like both urban and rural food and nutrition security, not just more calorie, more rice, more wheat, more maize?
I mean, Changan, that's a much bigger question than this proposal, but you know, I think that there are some centers, and IFPRI is one, I think World Fish is another, who, you know, are becoming attuned to the challenges of urban food systems and this, you know, rural-urban connection. There are other centers that might not have that at the top of their priorities. But what I think is important is, you know, if you look at the partners that we had for this initiative, there are a lot of people outside the CG who really are working on these things, want to work on these issues, and it's a conversation that's happening in the rest of the world, and sometimes that doesn't always permeate. But I think there are a couple of centers like like IFPRI that would be good partners. I think this would fit quite nicely with the Agriculture for Nutrition and Health research program that we are part of, and the Water, Land, and Ecosystems program that we're part of. So I don't know if John is here. So anyway, so that's a brief answer to your very political question. So.
Thank you. We had the gentleman there.
Hi, my name is Gary Bittner with the USAID, and I really appreciate the presentation. Quite a diverse research program here. I was really impressed with all the data that was presented in that first 6 or 7 slides. Very valuable information. And I was just wondering, for the research proposal, what is it for, like a 10-year period, 20-year period?
Yeah.
That was one question. And another one was taking a look at some
You've got
concerns
money.
about looking at para-cities and the safe disposal practices that are taking place. Because as we move products into the cities or in the para-cities, those practices I think are probably important. Probably a lot of lessons learned. I want to say I appreciate, the diverse cities that you're working with. And I think, producing some results right away that they can share and say, well, why are they doing it and why are they successful? To try to generate, progress to adopt policies that really work.
Yeah. So the period for this proposal was 5 years. And absolutely, we can share the results at each one of those stages, not just with the cities that are involved in the project directly, but with, as I mentioned, the C40 or 80 now cities, and then the 100+ cities who are part of this Milan Food Policy Pact. So you're getting this learning not just with the cities that are part of the initiative, but with this larger group of cities who signed up to this initiative because they know they need to focus on this kind of thing. The issue around safe disposal, food safety, I think is really increasingly important, particularly in developing country cities, and it might be something as we're looking at how to improve upon this proposal to think more about who could be a partner, because none of the groups that we have at the moment really has that kind of expertise. But we're certainly open. That's part of the reason I'm presenting this, because there are other issues. And as I said, other cities, we've talked with a Mediterranean research group that's quite excited about seeing if we can do this in the Mediterranean basin, North Africa included. So, you just need to find the willing mayors who are interested in participating. So.
Thank you. We had Gus Schumacher and then the lady next to him.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Virginia. I was particularly interested in 2 issues. One, that you didn't mention the real estate industry. And what we're finding here, and again, I'm looking to hear more in China. I used to work a bit in China years ago. This explosion of movement from rural China to urban China, and just thousands, millions of units being built. The question then would be, how are the foods being incorporated or not into those new huge housing estates in many of developing countries? Well, we noticed this here in the States, following up on Emmy's comment earlier on food policy councils, that more and more cities are looking at these housing units and saying, whoa, we have affordable housing, but we don't have affordable, they're building great units, billions and billions of dollars in affordable housing, but not incorporating in the planning affordable, accessible, nutritious foods, not even building in those affordable housing any stores for food. Yeah. So you go in, like we're doing a lot of work in D.C., putting in farmers markets and cooperatives and healthy food, and then trying to reinvigorate the convenience stores. Baltimore is rezoning its urban spaces for agriculture, and then I think you saw in some of the last couple of days the innovative work. There are Togolese scientists in the University of D.C. that are creating 16 kinds of Togolese Western African vegetables and selling them in urban areas, because there are 900,000 immigrants from Africa in the metropolitan. they want a different diet, a more nutritious diet. So again, another example is in the richer areas, like in DC, they're building in stores right into the housing complexes. So you're paying $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom. You go downstairs to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. You can't do that in 900,000 units around. So again, a question is, can your research then look at not to the real estate, but the housing, and then how does the housing then build in healthy food as people move into the cities pretty rapidly?
So I think maybe that's implicit in the issues, Gus, around land use policies, which maybe it's too implicit. We should make it more explicit, because you absolutely have to look at the pressure that's coming from housing, largely, on urban areas. You can't exclude that. And I think when you talk about the kinds of policy interventions that could be put in place, exactly the kind of things that you're talking about, could be part of that. I'm not a big fan of thinking urban gardens are going to solve all the problems, but there are ways that you can start incorporating or protecting some land areas from development to be used for agriculture. I mean, there are different possibilities, different cities. So it's implicit when we talk about land use, but next time I'll make it more explicit. But learning from some of the models of what's being done in this country and in Europe would be very useful. So.
You have the mic, and then I'll come to the side of the room.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Gina Kennedy, and I also work at Biodiversity International with Anne. So I just wanted to add a little bit to what Anne has already explained about the proposal, but to add a bit on Emmy and Peter's question. So Emmy's question on governance and institutional factors, and then Peter's question was the idea that the city will become its own self-centered food hub. So we were really fortunate in the development of the proposal to work with someone from the mayor's office in Curitiba, Brazil. And he really is a fantastic champion, really, for food and nutrition security. But his driving motivation for wanting to be part of this proposal was the nutritional problems that his city faced. So he was really struck by the increase in obesity and diet-related non-communicable diseases. And as part of the food security office for the mayor, he was very, very concerned about those public health problems. So just on his own, with his team, he started trying to say, what can I do? What do we need to do to try and solve this problem of the poor diet? And he focused on increasing fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, as Anne showed in the presentation. What we need is a lot more fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, other than just staple foods and processed foods. So he worked with institutions that the city has, such as their low-income food provision programs. They have markets where low-income shoppers can go, and trying to make a lot of incentives by more access to fruits and vegetables, more attractive displays of fruits and vegetables, more proposal.
Thank you very much, Gina. I saw Astrid's hand up here. If you can pass the mic to Astrid with the German embassy.
Thank you so much, and wonderful presentation. I think we're very interested in this project. As you know, last year in January, agriculture ministers also discussed these issues. And I think one important point, which is building on the previous speakers, is that there is a huge impact also on infrastructure in the whole. You brought up the example of London, where 25% of the jobs are related to whatever food sector. So are there possibilities within the project to bring these infrastructural aspects like streets, storage, whatever you need on these routes? Is there space for these kind of aspects?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So as you know, I was one of the speakers at Green Week last year that focused on this, and one of the interesting things I found in those discussions is the discussants were interested in food security writ large, but the issue of nutrition didn't come up a lot, and that was, I was pushing that because I think, as Gina said, that is a front and center concern for a lot of mayors, but they maybe don't define health in terms of nutrition as yet. In terms of the infrastructure, I mean, that again, it's part of when you look at sort of land use policies and policy levers, institutional levers, how can governments use those to, increase people's ability to access food? How can they use those to decrease traffic? I mean, in some of our cities, delivery bans create huge traffic tie-ups, right? So there's a lot that you can think about in terms of transport infrastructure when you're looking at the policy levers that cities have. So.
And if I may, I would like to comment that my two questions come comments as I wait to see if anybody else has others. One is picking up on the comment that Corey you made from the USAID, and I was wondering if it already exists or whether there is provision in this project or other projects to kind of have an inventory or a warehouse of other interventions that have been tried in different cities, different countries, as kind of a clearinghouse, what worked where, to kind of build a series of case studies, not only for these 6 cities to learn from, but over the last 20, 30, 40 years. The example that Emmy mentioned, is there kind of a consolidated place, or is there room for that kind of learning? And the second question I have, I hear in your presentation and the questions and comments here, land. Where is water? Because I think there is a lot of competition for water between urban and non-urban, and especially with rapid urbanization and differences in access to water, prices for water. So I'm also wondering, what are the implications, not just for quality of water, but access to water with rapid urbanization, and whether that factors into this or other related work?
So I'll let Gina maybe talk, because she was really writing the proposal. I just read it at the end, about the learning and institutional looking at assessing what's happening in the cities and elsewhere. But on the water issue, it's a huge part of the proposal, because water is very much in demand in urban centers. There is a significant impact on water quality from peri-urban agricultural production systems. As I mentioned, sometimes it's from animal production, sometimes it's from overuse or use of nitrogen in very fragile areas. And even in this area, we are asked not to use certain kinds of fertilizers on our yards because we're in the Chesapeake Basin area. So water is a huge, huge issue, both, as you say, quality, but also, the competition for the resource itself. And one of the innovative things that the UDC was doing was talking about how to sort of recycle water into agricultural production systems to reduce that demand. So it's absolutely a strong part. But Gina, do you want to talk about the learning
Let's give you a
process?
mic. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's an excellent question. Anne mentioned the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, and it's a consortium of 100 more cities. And I know that group had a prize where different cities were encouraged to apply. They had many different categories, including sustainability of the food system, food waste, accessibility, affordability, diet. So they had many categories, and there were a couple hundred submissions to that, and that was on best practices. So what has your city done that's a best practice? So I think that would be a very rich resource, because they already have a few hundred examples written up. But it would be very good maybe to think towards having them published in a more systematic way, more open access, more accessible to people. So I'm sure there are these lots of people working on the city consortiums and city alliances that we could tap into to try and get those lessons learned. And so I know that a few exist, but maybe not documented in as user-friendly a form as they could be.
Perhaps even evaluated, so in a way that there are, evidence there and so forth. Before I give a chance to Anne to make closing comment, and then to our Director General, any final burning question or comment or suggestion that anybody wishes to make? This is the moment. And if not, I will give Anne a chance to say any Any final thoughts on your side before I call on Schengen?
I just want to thank you all for the questions because, coming to this kind of group presenting this work that is new, getting input from this kind of a group on what we're missing, maybe thinking more about the learning opportunities, being more explicit about the link between land use and real estate. It's very helpful, and I think as we go forward, we may need to think about some additional partners also on the food safety issues that were mentioned that are not maybe in our wheelhouse and not in the wheelhouse of any of our existing partners, but could be important additions as we shape this for other donors who might be interested in funding it. So.
And thank you so much. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. And I now ask our Director General to offer closing reflections. Schengen.